Chapter 6, Soul Tether. Zara Cinderkin was nearly asleep when the air above her bed shimmered, coalescing into a translucent image that hovered like mist caught in moonlight. She sat bolt upright, fire sparking instinctively at her fingertips before recognition dawned. This was not an ordinary apparition, but a spirit projection, and the face taking shape belonged to Cassius Nightshade.
Don't attack.
His voice came through the projection, distant yet clear, with urgency evident despite the ethereal quality of spirit communication.
I haven't much time. Lyra needs you.
Zara scrambled from her bed, forgetting her nightclothes as she addressed the hovering image.
What's happened? The necklace?
Worse than we imagined.
Cassius confirmed, his translucent features tightening with strain as he maintained the difficult projection.
Something within it is attempting to pull her soul inside. I'm in her tower chamber, but I cannot maintain her tether alone.
Her tower? How did you...
Zara began, then shook her head.
Never mind. I'm coming.
She was already reaching for her robe, her mind sorting through possible routes to reach Lyra's heavily warded tower without raising alarms.
Use whatever method will get you there fastest,
Cassius urged, his projection beginning to waver at the edges.
She gave you some means of access, I assume. As her closest friend?
Zara's hand went automatically to the small amulet she wore even while sleeping. A gift from Lyra years ago, paired with one the High Councilor's daughter kept in her chamber. Originally created for adolescent convenience, allowing secret midnight visits during their academy days, the matched amulets now served a more serious purpose.
I have a way,
she confirmed, pulling the robe closed as she moved across her chamber.
How much time do we have?
Minutes, not hours,
Cassius replied, his image flickering as his focus divided between maintaining the projection and whatever battle he waged in Lyra's tower.
Come alone. Trust no one else with this. The necklace's influence extends beyond its physical location.
The projection dissolved before she could ask further questions, leaving Zara in darkness broken only by moonlight filtering through her window. She moved with urgent precision, grabbing the few items that might prove useful while keeping her actions quiet enough to avoid alerting household servants. Festival celebrations continued throughout Pyreholm, providing useful cover for unusual movement, but explaining her rush to Lyra's tower in the middle of engagement night would create complications they couldn't afford. Within moments, she slipped from her family residence, keeping to shadow paths she'd memorized since childhood. Shortcuts through Pyreholm's complex layout, known only to those who'd spent years exploring beyond official routes. The matched amulet would grant access to Lyra's tower once she reached it, bypassing wards designed to repel anyone without proper authorization. The night air carried lingering scents of festival smoke and celebratory spices, with the city still partially awake despite the late hour. Distant laughter floated from taverns where revelers continued engagement festivities. Occasional bursts of minor flame magic illuminated streets where young mages showed off techniques loosened by wine and ceremony. None paid attention to a single cloaked figure moving purposefully through less populated passages. Zara reached the base of Lyra's tower within 15 minutes. Record time, even by her standards. The elegant spire rose against the starlit sky, windows dark save for the faintest glow visible from the uppermost chamber. No guards stood watch. The High Councilor's daughter was considered secure within her private domain. protected by generations of accumulated wards and her own considerable magical talent. Those same protections now presented a challenge. Zara withdrew the amulet from beneath her robe, a small amber stone set in copper, warm against her palm with subtle enchantment. Its twin resided in Lyra's chamber, creating a magical resonance that would temporarily recognize Zara as an authorized presence, rather than an intruder. She pressed the amulet against the tower's entry door, feeling ancient wards assess and reluctantly accept her presence. The heavy door swung inward without sound, revealing the spiral staircase with its ruby-flecked steps that recognized only invited guests. Clutching the amulet tightly, Zara began the ascent, each step illuminating briefly beneath her feet, before returning to dormancy. The climb seemed endless, her breath coming in controlled gasps as she pushed herself to maintain an urgent pace without sacrificing necessary silence. What awaited in Lyra's chamber? Cassius had mentioned her soul being pulled into the necklace, a concept so foreign to traditional fire magic understanding that Zara struggled to conceptualize the danger, let alone prepare for it. Finally, she reached the uppermost landing, the tower's private chamber secured by one final door, inlaid with the Embersong family seal. Zara pressed the amulet against this last barrier, feeling stronger resistance as more personal wards assessed her presence. For a heart-stopping moment, the enchantments seemed to waver in their recognition. Then the door swung silently inward, revealing the scene within. Lyra lay motionless on her bed, completely nude, her flame-red hair spilling across Cassius's lap as he sat cross-legged beside her. His eyes were clouded with spirit sight, hands hovering inches above the necklace at her throat, violet energy flowing from his fingertips to create a web-like pattern that seemed to wrap around both the jewelry and Lyra's chest. His body remained utterly still save for the controlled rhythm of his breathing, with every resource focused on whatever working he performed. Shock froze Zara momentarily at the threshold, not merely at Lyra's nudity, though that was startling enough given the spirit seer's presence, but at the visible struggle occurring beyond physical perception. Even with limited sensitivity to spirit energy, she could see something was terribly wrong. The necklace pulsed with sickly light that seemed to reach tendrils toward Lyra's heart, while a faint outline of her form, something separate from her physical body, appeared to be slowly dragging toward the central fire opal.
Close the door.
Cassius said without looking up, his voice strained with effort.
Reactivate the wards.
Zara obeyed immediately, securing the chamber before approaching the bed. Up close, the situation appeared even more dire. Lyra's physical form showed no obvious injuries, but emanated a wrongness recognizable even to non-spirit sensitives. Her skin too pale, her breathing too shallow. The subtle glow that surrounded all living beings noticeably dimmed.
What's happening to her?
Zara demanded, instinctively keeping her voice low despite the privacy wards.
The necklace is attempting to extract her soul.
Cassius explained, his gaze never leaving the intricate working his hands maintained.
Not merely influence or control it, consume it entirely. I'm maintaining a tether to prevent complete extraction, but I'm losing ground with each minute.
Zara reached toward her friend, then halted as Cassius made a sharp sound of warning.
Don't touch her physical form,
he cautioned.
The connection is precarious. Any disturbance could snap what remains of her soul's anchor to her body.
How is this possible?
Zara asked, her hands hovering uselessly above her friend's still form.
Necklaces don't eat souls. Even forbidden enchantments have limits.
This is beyond standard enchantment.
Cassius replied, with strain evident in each word.
Something lives within the central stone, something with hunger and purpose. I suspect it was dormant until tonight's ceremony, activated by Alek's failed attempts to use the crown working.
The implications were horrifying. Not merely manipulation, but consumption. Something within the necklace attempting to devour Lyra's essential self, leaving behind an empty physical shell. Zara's mind raced through her limited knowledge of such magic, finding nothing in Fire Guild training that addressed such violation.
What can I do?
She asked, her practical nature asserting itself through shock. Cassius's eyes cleared momentarily, fixing on her with surprising lucidity given his divided focus.
First, see to her modesty. I cannot move without risking her soul's complete extraction, but she deserves dignity.
The request, particularly its phrasing, struck Zara forcefully. Even in crisis, facing magic beyond his experience, the spirit seer's concern included Lyra's personal dignity. Recognition of her autonomy despite her vulnerable state. It spoke volumes about his character, creating a sharp contrast with Alek's entitled presumption. Zara moved quickly to the wardrobe, retrieving a silk robe that she carefully draped over Lyra's exposed form, arranging it to provide coverage while avoiding disturbing either Lyra's position or Cassius's working. The task complete, she returned to the bedside, noting how the necklace's pulsing seemed to intensify, as if angry at being partially concealed.
Now what?
She asked, her hands instinctively forming the fire-protective posture taught to academy students facing unknown magical threats.
Listen carefully.
Cassius said, his voice dropping to ensure her complete attention.
I cannot maintain this tether indefinitely. The necklace grows stronger while I grow weaker. Eventually, it will complete what it's begun, pulling her soul entirely within the central stone.
There must be something we can do.
Zara insisted, refusing to accept such a grim assessment.
Some counterspell, some method of breaking the enchantment.
There is one possibility.
Cassius interrupted, his expression shifting to something beyond mere determination. A resolve that carried personal weight beyond professional obligation.
But it requires significant risk with no guarantee of success.
Tell me.
Zara demanded, ready to attempt anything that might save her friend. Cassius took a measured breath, the working around his hands never faltering despite the conversation.
I believe I can follow her.
Follow her into the necklace?
Precisely.
He confirmed.
The extraction creates a pathway between the physical world and whatever realm exists within the central stone. As a spirit seer, I can project my consciousness along that pathway while maintaining connection to my physical form.
Zara stared at him, trying to comprehend magic so far beyond Fire Guild understanding.
You're suggesting your spirit can enter the necklace while your body remains here? To do what exactly?
To find her soul before it's completely absorbed.
Cassius explained.
To help her fight whatever awaits within. To guide her back to her body if possible.
The plan sounded equal parts brilliant and insane. The desperate gambit of someone willing to risk everything on an uncertain possibility. Zara studied him with new intensity, seeing beneath his composed exterior to the driving force behind such willingness for self-sacrifice.
Why would you risk that for her?
She asked directly, needing to understand his motivation before entrusting her friend's survival to such a dangerous attempt.
You've only just met her.
Something shifted in Cassius's expression. the clouded focus of spirit sight momentarily clearing as his violet eyes met Zara's directly. In that unguarded moment, the answer became transparently obvious. His features revealed a raw truth beyond words, an emotion he hadn't acknowledged aloud, but which drove his every action since entering Lyra's life.
Oh,
Zara breathed, recognition dawning.
oh, I see.
The spirit seer neither confirmed nor denied, his eyes returning to their spirit-focused cloudiness as he maintained the working that prevented Lyra's complete extraction.
Does she know?
Zara asked softly.
No.
Cassius replied, the single syllable carrying complex layers of both certainty and regret.
You must tell her.
Zara urged, understanding instinctively that such knowledge might matter deeply to her friend, who had lived her entire life within political calculations that left little room for genuine connection. Cassius's expression hardened with a determination that held something deeper than mere resolve.
I cannot force her to make that choice,
He stated firmly.
She already carries too much burden.
The response revealed more about his character than a lengthy explanation could have provided. Unlike Alek, who sought to possess and control Lyra for his own purposes, Cassius recognized her agency even at potential cost to his own desires. He would risk his life to save her, without demanding acknowledgement or reciprocation. The antithesis of the manipulation that had characterized her relationship with her fiancé.
What do you need me to do?
Zara asked, accepting his decision without further argument. Time for personal revelations would come later, assuming they survived the immediate crisis.
Watch over our physical forms.
Cassius instructed, his focus returning fully to the working that maintained Lyra's tenuous connection to her body.
Prevent anyone from interrupting or disturbing either of us. What happens in the physical realm affects our spirits within the necklace. Any significant disruption could sever our connection to our bodies permanently.
The responsibility settled heavily on Zara's shoulders.
How long will this take?
Time moves differently in such places.
He replied.
Minutes here might be hours there, or the reverse. I cannot predict.
What if you don't return?
The question emerged before Zara could consider its tactfulness. Cassius's expression didn't change, but something in his voice carried acceptance of possibilities he'd already considered.
If neither of us has returned by dawn, seek help from Elder Thorn of the Spirit Guild. Tell him exactly what happened. He may know methods of extraction beyond my knowledge.
The pragmatic preparation for potential failure spoke volumes about both his experience and his clear-eyed assessment of the danger. No false reassurances, no minimizing of risk, just practical contingency for the worst-case outcome.
Is there anything else I should know before you attempt this?
Zara asked, determined to gather all relevant information before he departed.
2 things.
Cassius replied, his hands beginning a more complex pattern above the necklace as he prepared for transition.
First, under no circumstances attempt to remove the necklace while we're inside. It would sever the connection completely, trapping both souls within the stone permanently.
Zara nodded grimly.
And the second?
If Alek arrives seeking Lyra, do whatever necessary to keep him away.
Cassius continued, his tone hardening.
I suspect he knows more about what's happening than he's revealed. He may sense the necklace's activation.
I can handle Alek.
Zara stated with a confidence that wasn't entirely bravado. Her hidden air affinity provided advantages few fire mages would anticipate, particularly one arrogant enough to dismiss her as a mere social companion.
I believe you can.
Cassius replied, unexpected warmth briefly coloring his voice before professional focus reasserted itself.
I'm beginning the transition now. Once I've projected my consciousness into the necklace, my body will appear catatonic like Lyra's. Don't be alarmed.
Wait,
Zara said suddenly, struck by a realization.
how will you find her once you're inside? If this is some other realm?
The connection we established in the Ember Sanctuary.
Cassius explained, his hands continuing their intricate pattern above the necklace.
It created a resonance between our magical signatures that persists regardless of physical location. I'll be able to sense her presence through that link.
Another piece of understanding clicked into place for Zara. The connection they'd established went beyond a temporary magical alliance. It had created something permanent between them, something that transcended physical proximity. No wonder Cassius was willing to risk projection into an unknown magical realm. He already shared a bond with Lyra that made such a journey possible.
Good luck.
She offered inadequate words for the magnitude of what he attempted. Cassius nodded once, then closed his eyes completely, his breathing shifting to a deeper, more measured rhythm. The violet energy flowing from his fingertips intensified, creating a more elaborate pattern around both the necklace and Lyra's chest. For several heartbeats, nothing visible changed. Then his physical body suddenly slumped forward, caught only by his rigid meditative posture from collapsing completely. Simultaneously, a faint outline appeared momentarily above his physical form, a translucent suggestion of Cassius's features, visible for just an instant before being drawn like smoke into the central fire opal of the necklace. The jewel flared with angry light at this intrusion, pulsing more aggressively as if fighting unexpected resistance. Then stillness descended on the chamber. Two motionless bodies, Lyra lying pale and barely breathing on her bed, Cassius sitting cross-legged with her head still in his lap, his body now as unresponsive as hers. Only the necklace remained active, its pulsing taking on an irregular rhythm that suggested conflict occurring within its boundaries. Zara stood vigil beside them, hands ready to cast whatever protective measures might become necessary. The air in the chamber felt charged with potential, magical currents shifting unpredictably as battle commenced in a realm beyond physical perception. Though trained in practical fire magic rather than esoteric spirit techniques, even she could sense the wrongness emanating from the necklace. Hunger and malice focused on consumption rather than mere control. Minutes stretched with excruciating slowness. Zara paced the chamber perimeter, checking wards, reinforcing protections, and monitoring both still forms for any change in condition. The festival sounds from the city below gradually diminished as celebration gave way to slumber, leaving the tower wrapped in midnight silence, broken only by her soft footsteps and the barely perceptible breathing of her charges. What was happening within the necklace? What realm had claimed Lyra's soul? And what dangers did Cassius face in his attempt to retrieve her? Zara found herself praying to ancestors she'd rarely acknowledged, seeking intervention from those who might understand magic beyond current guild limitations. As midnight deepened toward the earliest morning hours, a faint red glow began emanating from the central fire opal. Not the pulsing that had characterized its previous activity, but a steady illumination that gradually increased in intensity. Zara approached cautiously, ready to withdraw if the light presented an immediate threat. her magical senses alert for any change in the chamber's energy. The stone's glow didn't extend beyond itself, contained within the crystalline structure that seemed to have developed a subtle crack not previously visible. Peering closer while maintaining a safe distance, Zara could almost imagine seeing movement within the stone, flickering suggestions of forms and landscapes visible through a ruby-tinted filter. Nothing distinct enough to identify, just an impression of activity occurring in a space that should have been solid gemstone. What had Cassius said about time moving differently in such places? Minutes here might be hours there. How long had passed in whatever realm contained her friend's soul? What battles had already occurred while Zara maintained silent vigil in the physical world? The waiting felt more difficult than active combat would have been. As someone trained in direct fire techniques, passive watchfulness against an invisible threat tested the limits of her patience and discipline. Yet she maintained her position, attention divided between chamber entrances that might admit external threat, and the still forms that showed no sign of imminent return. Dawn remained hours away, the longest night of Zara's life stretching before her with uncertainty as its only constant companion. She settled into guard position, drawing on academy training designed to maintain alertness during extended surveillance. Whatever happened within the necklace, she would ensure nothing in the physical realm interfered with Cassius's desperate attempt to retrieve Lyra's soul from whatever sought to consume it. Lyra regained consciousness gradually, awareness returning in fragmented pieces that refused to form a coherent whole. Sensations came first. Rough stone beneath her fingertips, heat pressing against her skin, an acrid scent filling her lungs with each breath. Then sound, distant rumbling punctuated by occasional sharp cracks like stones splitting under tremendous pressure. She opened her eyes to an unfamiliar landscape that appeared simultaneously alien and oddly recognizable. A cracked obsidian plain stretched before her, broken by jagged outcroppings of darker stone that reflected red-tinged light. The sky, if it could be called that, hung low and heavy with smoke or ash, with no sun visible yet ambient illumination casting everything in bloodied hues. Heat shimmered above the ground in visible waves, creating mirage-like distortions that shifted peripheral vision. "Where?" she began, her voice emerging hoarse as if unused for a considerable time. Attempting to sit upright, she discovered her body clothed in a simple gown of deep red silk that she didn't recognize. A garment both formal and impractical for the blasted landscape surrounding her. Memory returned in disjointed flashes. The engagement ceremony. Alek's thwarted working, returning to her tower. The necklace's escalating assault on her senses. She reached automatically for her throat, fingers finding the fire opals still present, still warm against her skin despite her displacement to this strange environment.
"I'm inside it,"
she realized with dawning horror, recognizing the landscape for what it must be. Some pocket dimension contained within the necklace itself, a magical prison designed to trap and contain her soul, while leaving her physical form an empty vessel for Alek's purposes. As understanding crystallized, Lyra attempted to access her magic. The reflexive defensive gesture taught to even the youngest fire apprentices. Nothing responded. No flame gathered at her fingertips. No heat answered her call. No connection to the familiar power that had defined her existence since childhood. She reached instead for the ancestral connections that formed her secondary magical strength, seeking guidance or intervention from Embersong predecessors. Silence. Complete magical isolation. Perhaps most disconcerting was the absence of the recently established connection with Cassius. The resonance they had created in the Ember Sanctuary that had remained present as background awareness since its formation. That lifeline to another consciousness, to a perspective beyond her own, had vanished along with her other magical connections. Truly alone for perhaps the first time in her life, Lyra forced herself to stand, taking proper inventory of her surroundings. The obsidian plain extended in all directions, broken by increasingly dramatic stone formations that resembled frozen waves, caught in a moment of violent upheaval. In the far distance, what appeared to be mountains rose against the smoke-filled sky, their peaks occasionally illuminated by flashes of fire, visible even at a considerable distance. No visible path presented itself as a better option than others. No signs of habitation or purpose beyond a desolate landscape that seemed designed to evoke despair through its very emptiness. Yet somehow the environment felt inhabited, watched by a presence neither visible nor immediately threatening, but undeniably aware of her arrival.
Hello?
She called, her voice sounding flat and muffled in the heavy air.
Is anyone here?
Only silence answered, broken by another distant crack of stone shifting under pressure. Lyra took an experimental step forward, testing the ground's stability before committing to movement. The obsidian surface held firm despite its fractured appearance, with heat radiating through the thin slippers that had appeared with the silk gown. Having no better option, she began walking toward the distant mountains, reasoning that an elevated position might provide a better vantage point to understand her imprisonment. Each step felt simultaneously weightless and leaden, movement requiring more effort than physical reality would suggest, as if traversing a boundary between material and immaterial existence. How much time had passed in the physical world? Was her body lying empty in her tower, vulnerable to whatever use Alek might make of it once he discovered her soul trapped within his enchanted gift? Would anyone recognize what had happened? Or would they attribute her unresponsive state to exhaustion from ceremonial exertion? These questions haunted each step as Lyra continued across the fractured plain, determined to understand her prison before attempting escape. Knowledge had always been her strength. Even deprived of magical connection, her analytical mind remained a functional weapon against whatever had engineered her current circumstance. She had covered perhaps half the distance to the mountainous formations when the sensation of being watched intensified dramatically. Lyra stopped, turning slowly to survey her surroundings with careful attention. The landscape appeared unchanged, yet the presence had solidified from vague awareness to directed attention, focused with unnerving intensity on her isolated figure.
I know you're there.
She stated firmly, refusing to show fear despite her vulnerable position.
Show yourself.
The air before her shimmered, heat distortion coalescing into a more deliberate pattern that gradually assumed a humanoid form. No physical manifestation appeared, merely a suggestion of presence indicated by subtle shifts in the visual field, an outline that interrupted the landscape's continuity without claiming definitive shape.
At last, my little bird.
Came a voice that sounded disturbingly like Alek's, yet carried differences that made identification uncertain.
We get to meet face to face.
The air before Lyra shimmered, heat distortion coalescing into a more deliberate pattern that gradually assumed a humanoid form. No physical manifestation appeared at first, merely a suggestion of presence, indicated by subtle shifts in the visual field, an outline that interrupted the landscape's continuity without claiming definitive shape. Then it stepped forward through the smoke, and Lyra felt her breath catch in her throat. The entity standing before her bore an unsettling resemblance to Alek Brightforge, yet distorted in ways that revealed its true nature. It towered at least 7 feet tall, with copper gold skin gleaming like metal in the strange crimson light of this realm. From its forehead emerged 2 horns formed of living flame, constantly shifting and crackling with inner energy. Most disturbing was how its features seemed both familiar and alien. Alek's face stretched and transformed into something ancient and predatory. Its lower half appeared carved from obsidian, the volcanic glass catching and reflecting the ambient red light in hypnotic patterns. Where human feet should have been, the creature stood on burning hooves that left scorched imprints in the ground with each step. A simple loincloth of rippling flame provided its only covering, the cloth itself seeming alive as it shifted and flowed across its form.
Surprised?
The entity's mouth curved into an unsettling smile that mirrored Alek's, yet carried a predatory quality transcending human expression.
You shouldn't be. We've been intimate for some time now.
Lyra maintained her composure through sheer force of will, her mind racing to understand what confronted her.
You're not Alek.
Oh, but I am.
The entity replied, its voice resonating with unnatural depth.
A part of him, at least. The part he willingly sacrificed in a bargain with powers beyond guild understanding.
It gestured broadly, indicating the blasted landscape around them.
Welcome to my domain, little bird. The space between realities where I've waited for you.
It took another step forward, hooves scorching the obsidian ground.
I've been waiting so eagerly to meet you properly. The necklace provided glimpses, tastes of your essence, but having your soul here with me.
Its eyes, gold like Alek's but with vertical pupils reminiscent of a serpent's, traveled over her with uncomfortable intensity.
So much more satisfying.
Understanding dawned with terrible clarity. The necklace hadn't merely been a monitoring device or control mechanism. It had been preparing her, mapping her essence, creating a pathway for her soul's extraction into whatever pocket dimension existed within the central fire opal.
What do you want from me?
Lyra demanded, finding strength in directness even as she calculated potential escape routes. The entity laughed, the sound like crackling flames.
Everything, little bird. Your ancestral connections, your magical essence, your physical form eventually.
It moved with unsettling fluidity, circling her with predatory grace.
Alek made a bargain with an Ifrit, a powerful fire spirit beyond guild understanding. I am what remains of that exchange.
So he sacrificed part of himself.
Lyra concluded, the scheme becoming clearer if no less disturbing.
And tied it to the necklace to bind me.
Clever girl.
The entity purred, stopping to tower over her.
The Embersong line has unusually robust connections to ancestral flame patterns, pathways that transcend normal boundaries between elements. Through you, we gain access to powers that would otherwise require much greater sacrifice.
It reached toward her face with burning fingers.
I know so much about you already, Lyra Embersong. Your body's responses to the necklace's influence, the pleasure pathways so easily activated, the resistance your mind maintained even as your physical form surrendered.
Its eyes gleamed with disturbing anticipation.
I look forward to exploring those responses more, directly now that you're here in my domain.
Revulsion and fear mingled with analytical assessment as Lyra took another step back. This entity, this fragment of Alek's consciousness merged with whatever power inhabited the incomplete crown, represented a more immediate threat than the physical necklace itself. Here, in this strange reality within the fire opal, her soul stood vulnerable to integration with the crowns working in ways her physical body had been protected from by Cassius's intervention. Cassius. The thought of him sent unexpected warmth through her consciousness, a reminder of a connection that transcended physical proximity. Was that connection still accessible here, in this pocket dimension? Could their established resonance potentially extend even into this strange realm? Before she could explore that possibility, the landscape behind the entity suddenly tore open, a jagged rift appearing in reality itself, revealing swirling darkness beyond. The distraction was momentary but sufficient. Lyra seized the opportunity without hesitation, turning to sprint away from the entity across the fractured obsidian plane.
Yes.
The creature's voice rang out behind her, excitement rather than anger coloring its tone.
Run, little bird. Flight makes the eventual capture so much more satisfying.
Lyra ignored the taunt, focusing on putting distance between herself and the entity, while searching for anything in this blasted landscape that might offer advantage or shelter. The broken terrain provided no obvious sanctuary, just endless variations of shattered obsidian plain and jagged stone formations extending toward distant fiery mountains.
You're already mine, little bird.
The entity called, its voice somehow reaching her clearly despite increasing distance.
Let me show you what that means.
The ground beneath her feet suddenly shifted, obsidian plates sliding against each other like tectonic movement accelerated to visible speed. Lyra leapt instinctively as a fissure opened where she had been standing, landing on more stable terrain before continuing her flight without breaking stride. This realm responded to the entity's will, she realized. Environmental manipulation beyond normal magical capability. Physical reality itself bent to accommodate its desires, creating a significant disadvantage for anyone attempting to evade it within its own domain.
I already know your body so well.
The creature taunted, its voice seeming to come from multiple directions simultaneously.
Every reaction, every response, every secret pleasure point mapped through days of the necklace's influence.
Lyra refused to engage with these provocations, conserving breath for continued flight while extending her awareness toward anything that might offer an escape route or defensive position. Without access to her fire magic or ancestral connections, traditional combat wasn't a viable option. Strategy and understanding remained her primary weapons. She rounded a massive obsidian formation and found herself facing a transformed landscape. where an endless plain had stretched before. Now an elaborate labyrinth of stone corridors extended, pathways shifting and realigning even as she watched.
A game, perhaps.
The entity's voice emerged from the labyrinth's center.
Find your way to me, and I might consider releasing you. Fail, and your soul becomes permanently part of the Crown's working.
A false choice, obviously. Yet the labyrinth offered temporary shelter from direct pursuit, potentially providing an opportunity to gather information or discover a weakness in this realm's construction. With no better alternative apparent, Lyra entered the maze, choosing passages that led away from the entity's voice rather than toward it. The labyrinth's interior proved eerily beautiful despite its threatening purpose. Obsidian walls reflecting distorted images of herself as she passed, occasionally showing glimpses of other realities or memories from her own life. The corridors shifted subtly behind her, ensuring no retreat along the exact path she had followed, though multiple passages remained open ahead.
I know exactly what you want, Lyra Embersong.
The entity's voice floated through the labyrinth, bouncing off reflective surfaces to reach her from unexpected angles.
The necklace revealed your deepest desires, even as you fought its influence.
She continued moving, ignoring the provocations while maintaining direction away from the voice's apparent source. The labyrinth's configuration seemed designed to guide her toward its center regardless of chosen path. Subtle angles and almost imperceptible slopes creating psychological pressure to turn specific directions at intersections. Understanding this manipulation allowed her to counteract it, deliberately choosing passages that required moving against the subliminal guidance. The entity's voice grew momentarily fainter, suggesting she had successfully deviated from its preferred route.
You crave recognition beyond the guild limitations.
The voice continued, adjusting to her new position.
Appreciation for precision over power. Acknowledgement of your true potential beyond political calculations.
The accuracy of these observations proved more unsettling than the physical pursuit. Evidence that the necklace had indeed accessed aspects of her consciousness beyond simply monitoring magical pathways. Yet these insights remained superficial, reflecting obvious frustrations rather than deeper understanding of her true nature.
The spirit seer offers an illusion of such appreciation.
The entity continued, its voice taking on a subtly different quality as it mentioned Cassius.
Temporary alignment of convenience rather than genuine connection. Once your usefulness in opposing Alek ends, so too will his interest.
This particular provocation struck closer to her uncertainties than the entity likely realized. The connection she had formed with Cassius, the unprecedented resonance between their supposedly incompatible magical signatures, had developed with unsettling speed and intensity. Professional alliance had evolved into something more personal with disconcerting rapidity, raising legitimate questions about its sustainability beyond the current crisis. Yet even as these doubts surfaced, Lyra felt something stir within her consciousness. A subtle warmth, like a distant ember refusing to be extinguished. The resonance they had established in the sanctuary remained present, she realized, even here in this strange dimension. Not active communication, but a persisting connection. A thread linking her to reality beyond the fire opal's prison. She followed this sensation like a compass reading, choosing passages that strengthened rather than diminished the connection's subtle pulse. The entity's voice shifted again, changing tactics as it apparently sensed her growing focus.
Has he told you the full truth about Spirit Guild aims regarding the crown?
It asked, its tone now thoughtful rather than taunting.
Their archives hold more information than they've shared with other guilds. Their interest extends beyond preventing Alek's ambitions.
Lyra continued moving, recognizing attempted manipulation in this sudden shift to seemingly reasonable concerns. The entity sought to plant seeds of doubt about Cassius's motivations, destabilizing the one connection that potentially threatened its control.
Did he explain how the Spirit Guild drove the final separation of elements after multiple failed attempts to claim the crown for themselves?
The voice persisted.
How they advocated destruction of remaining components when they couldn't control the complete artifact?
Historical distortions with just enough potential truth to warrant consideration. A classic manipulation technique, blending fact with fiction to create convincing deception. Lyra filed these claims for later evaluation, rather than allowing them to disrupt her immediate focus on escape. The labyrinth continued shifting around her, walls rearranging in increasingly aggressive patterns that forced direction changes despite her resistance. The entity had apparently abandoned subtle guidance in favor of direct manipulation, physically altering passages to herd her toward a predetermined destination. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she navigated these constraints, maintaining general direction away from the center, despite increasingly limited options. The subtle connection to Cassius provided orientation when visual cues proved misleading, allowing her to select passages that strengthened rather than diminished that tenuous lifeline.
Your resistance is admirable.
The entity acknowledged, its voice closer now despite her efforts.
Few souls maintain such determination when separated from their physical forms. The Embersong lineage has always produced exceptional vessels.
Again that word. Vessels. Containers valued for what they could hold rather than their inherent worth. The consistent terminology connecting Alek's perspective with this entity's assessment revealed fundamental alignment in their approach to others. Tools to be used rather than partners to be respected. The contrast with Cassius's approach couldn't have been starker. Where Alek sought to control and direct, Cassius had offered collaboration and support. Where this entity viewed her as a vessel to be filled with purpose, Cassius had recognized her agency even when offering assistance. This realization strengthened her resolve, clarifying the fundamental choice these competing influences represented: dominance versus partnership, control versus connection, imposition versus invitation. Whatever complications might exist in her developing relationship with Cassius, its foundation in mutual respect represented a genuine alternative to the subjugation Alek and his crown fragment offered.
You're overthinking again.
The entity observed, its voice now coming from just beyond the passage ahead.
Always analyzing, categorizing, comparing options when simple surrender would bring such immediate relief.
Lyra paused at an intersection, sensing a trap in the corridor ahead, despite being unable to see the entity directly. The limited options had narrowed to 3 potential paths. One leading seemingly away from the voice, but feeling wrong through her connection with Cassius. One leading directly toward the voice and clearly unwise. and a third offering lateral movement that neither strengthened nor weakened the tenuous resonance guiding her. She chose the third path, moving parallel to what seemed like the labyrinth's center, seeking a better option than those immediately presented. The passageway narrowed as she progressed, obsidian walls closing in from 7 feet to barely 5, making each step feel increasingly confined.
Clever.
The entity commented, its voice now coming from behind rather than ahead.
But ultimately futile. This entire realm exists within the fire opal. There is no true escape, only temporary evasion.
The passage opened suddenly into a circular chamber with multiple exits. 7 identical corridors spaced equidistantly around the perimeter. At the chamber's center stood a small pedestal bearing a flame that burned without fuel, shifting between colors in hypnotic rhythm. A visual trap, clearly. The entity expected her to approach the flame, likely triggering whatever magical binding would complete her soul's entrapment. Yet the chamber offered a moment of respite from direct pursuit, an opportunity to evaluate options beyond immediate flight. Lyra moved carefully around the chamber's perimeter, maintaining distance from the central pedestal while examining each potential exit. The connection to Cassius seemed to pulse with equal strength regardless of which passage she approached, offering no guidance on the optimal escape route.
Your spirit seer attempts to reach you, you know.
The entity said conversationally, its voice emanating from all corridors simultaneously, though it remained physically absent.
His magical signature probes the boundaries between realms, seeking entrance to my domain.
This information, however manipulatively presented, aligned with what Lyra sensed through their connection. Cassius actively attempting to extend their resonance beyond mere awareness into actual intervention. The entity's acknowledgement suggested these efforts represented a genuine threat to its control, rather than an inconsequential distraction.
He lacks proper understanding of what he faces.
The entity continued, its tone almost sympathetic.
Spirit magic offers glimpses beyond veils, but cannot truly comprehend what exists between realities. His attempts to extract you will likely destroy your soul rather than save it.
Another manipulation, but containing potential truth, requiring consideration. Spirit seers trafficked in boundaries between worlds, but this pocket dimension inside the fire opal potentially represented something beyond standard spirit realm. Without the complete Crown of Cinders or full understanding of its original purpose, even Cassius might face dangerous limitations in attempting extraction. Yet what alternative existed? Surrender to the entity would mean permanent integration into the corrupted crown working. Her ancestral connections exploited to compensate for missing elemental components. Whatever risks Cassius's intervention carried, they presented a preferable option to guaranteed subjugation. Lyra closed her eyes, focusing entirely on the tenuous connection between them, attempting to strengthen it through deliberate attention rather than merely following its guidance. The resonance responded immediately, warming within her consciousness like a flame given additional fuel, expanding from background awareness to a more substantive presence.
Oh, I wouldn't do that.
The entity cautioned, something like concern entering its voice for the first time.
Actively amplifying external connection within this realm creates significant instability. Dimensional barriers are fragile things. easily torn by opposing forces.
This reaction confirmed her instinct. The connection with Cassius represented a genuine vulnerability in the entity's control, a potential escape route it couldn't easily counter. She intensified her focus, directing all available mental energy towards strengthening their resonance, despite the mounting pressure she sensed building around her. The chamber shuddered violently, obsidian walls cracking as reality itself seemed to protest this cross-dimensional linking. The flame on the central pedestal flared with aggressive crimson light, shifting and stretching as if trying to reach her even from that distance.
Stop this immediately.
The entity commanded, abandoning pretense of casual conversation.
You risk destruction of your very soul through this reckless connection.
Lyra ignored the warning, concentrating entirely on the strengthening resonance. Through their connection, she sensed Cassius more clearly now. His determined focus as he worked to create an extraction pathway. The physical toll this effort extracted as he channeled magic beyond normal spirit guild limitations. The emotional intensity driving him beyond safe boundaries in attempting to reach her. The chamber shuddered again, more violently. Sections of ceiling collapsing as dimensional integrity continued deteriorating. The entity finally materialized, stepping through one of the 7 corridors with an expression of genuine alarm replacing its previous predatory confidence.
Enough.
It commanded, raising flame-wreathed hands in a threatening gesture.
Your soul will be consumed before you achieve whatever escape you imagine possible.
The warning carried more truth than threat. Lyra could feel mounting pressure against her essence as reality destabilized around them. The pocket dimensions struggling to maintain coherence against external interference. Yet surrender now meant permanent captivity. Her soul forever enslaved to the crown's corrupted working. Drawing on final reserves of mental strength, she focused everything on the connection with Cassius, visualizing it as a physical lifeline extending beyond the fire opal's boundaries into true reality, where her body remained. The resonance surged in response, their established magical harmony creating a pathway that transcended normal limitations between dimensions.
No.
The entity lunged forward, abandoning intimidation for direct intervention as it recognized the genuine threat to its domain.
You belong to me now. To me.
Lyra dove toward the passage directly opposite the entity's position, narrowly avoiding its grasping hands as she rolled through the opening into the corridor beyond. The connection with Cassius pulsed strongly now, providing clear directional guidance where previously it had offered only general orientation. The labyrinth continued disintegrating around her as she ran, obsidian walls crumbling into fragments that dissolved before hitting the ground. Reality itself coming undone as the pocket dimensions struggled to maintain coherence against increasing external intervention.
You cannot escape.
The entity's voice followed her, rage replacing its previous controlled manipulation.
This realm exists between worlds. There is nowhere within it you can hide from me.
The labyrinth abruptly ended, walls simply vanishing to reveal the blasted plain stretching toward fiery mountains in the distance. Without the maze's confining passages, Lyra found herself exposed on open terrain with the entity's burning footprints visible in the obsidian surface behind her, rapidly closing distance. She ran with renewed determination, following the strengthening connection with Cassius that pulled her toward a specific destination beyond current visibility. The ground shuddered beneath her feet, fissures opening in random patterns as dimensional stability continued deteriorating around them.
I know exactly what you want.
The entity called, its voice carrying notes of desperation beneath the rage.
I can give you recognition beyond anything your guild would offer. Power beyond elemental limitations. Freedom from political constraints.
The promises slid past without impact. Transparent manipulation that ignored everything Lyra had demonstrated through consistent resistance. Not power or recognition, but autonomy and genuine connection drove her. Desires this entity fundamentally failed to comprehend, despite months of observing her through the necklace's enchantment. Ahead, the landscape suddenly shifted, a massive obsidian formation rising from the fractured plain to create an apparent dead end to her flight. The connection with Cassius pulled her directly toward this barrier despite its seeming impassability, suggesting something beyond physical appearance guided their resonance. Lyra skidded to a halt before the towering obsidian wall. Its surface so darkly reflective she could see her own terrified expression staring back at her. She spun around, seeking another path, only to find the entity standing mere feet away, its burning hooves having left a trail of scorched footprints across the obsidian plain.
You have reached a dead end, little bird.
It said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across its face. Its burning eyes roamed over her body with deliberate, possessive intent.
Now I will show you what it means to be mine.
Everywhere its gaze traveled, Lyra felt intense heat bloom across her skin. The same inappropriate arousal the necklace had been creating in the physical world, but magnified tenfold in this realm, where her soul stood vulnerable without bodily protection. Her breath caught as the sensation cascaded through her consciousness, more invasive and overwhelming than anything she had experienced before. The entity took a step closer, its burning hooves scorching the ground as its eyes continued their violation of her form. The loincloth did little to hide its obvious arousal as it reached one flaming hand toward her face.
There's nowhere left to run.
It purred, its voice dropping to an intimate register as it closed the final distance between them.
And soon you won't want to.
The entity's burning finger touched Lyra's forehead with surprising gentleness, the contact sending waves of heat cascading through her consciousness. Before she could react, obsidian chains materialized from the wall behind her, snaking around her wrists and ankles with liquid speed. They pulled her arms and legs wide, securing her spread eagle against the smooth, black surface.
That's so much better, isn't it, little bird?
The entity purred, its flaming eyes traveling down her form with predatory satisfaction. A tearing sound filled the air as her simple dress began to unravel, the fabric separating as if sliced by invisible knives. The entity tilted its head, watching with undisguised pleasure as the material fell away in strips, leaving her increasingly exposed in this nightmare realm.
Now we can truly begin,
It said, raising one burning hand toward her face.
Your soul will learn to sing for me, just as your body has already begun to respond.
Panic threatened to overwhelm Lyra's thoughts as the creature moved closer, its towering form radiating heat that penetrated her very essence. The obsidian chains felt both cold and burning against her skin, contradictory sensations that heightened her awareness of complete vulnerability. Without her magic, without her physical strength, trapped in a realm governed by the entity's will, what defense remained? Only the faint connection with Cassius persisted, a tenuous lifeline that seemed woefully inadequate against such an immediate threat. Yet she clung to it, focusing her remaining mental strength on that subtle resonance, even as the entity's burning fingers reached for her exposed collarbone. The air between them suddenly rippled, reality itself seeming to fold inward before tearing apart. Through this jagged rift stepped a familiar figure, Cassius Nightshade, his violet eyes blazing with focused intensity that transformed his scholarly features into something fierce and determined.
Step away from her.
He commanded, his voice carrying power that seemed to reverberate through the dimensional fabric itself. The entity spun toward the intrusion, momentary shock giving way to outraged possessiveness.
Impossible.
It hissed, flames intensifying around its horned head.
No spirit mage has ever penetrated this realm.
I'm not just any spirit mage.
Cassius replied, his hands already moving in complex patterns that left traces of silver light hanging in the air.
And she is not yours to claim.
Before the entity could respond, Cassius completed his working with a sharp gesture. The silver patterns coalesced, forming a perfect duplicate of himself that immediately launched toward the entity with preternatural speed. This spirit copy moved like quicksilver, its form somehow both substantial and ethereal as it engaged the flame-horned creature in direct combat. While his duplicate battled the entity, Cassius rushed to Lyra's side, his hands making subtle gestures that caused the obsidian chains to loosen their grip.
I can free you, but we have limited time.
He said, his voice steady despite the obvious strain of maintaining both his presence in this realm and the spirit duplicate fighting on their behalf.
My copy can distract it, but not indefinitely.
Behind them, the battle raged with elemental fury. The spirit duplicate moved with impossible speed, dodging gouts of flame while landing blows that seemed to disrupt the entity's very substance. The creature roared with frustrated rage, its attacks growing more violent as Cassius worked to release Lyra from her bonds.
How are you even here?
She asked as the chains dissolved completely, allowing her to step away from the wall while clutching the remnants of her torn dress around herself.
I followed our connection.
He explained, already guiding her away from the confrontation toward a seemingly unremarkable section of obsidian plain.
The resonance we established created a pathway I could trace directly to your soul's location.
In the physical world, Zara paced anxiously around Lyra's tower chamber, her gaze shifting between the two motionless forms on the bed. Lyra lay completely still, her breathing shallow and irregular, the necklace at her throat pulsing with angry red light. Beside her, Cassius sat cross-legged in a deep meditative trance, his hands extended toward the fire opals with violet energy flowing between his fingers and the jewelry.
Come on.
Zara muttered, checking the door's magical wards for the dozenth time to ensure they remained undetected.
Whatever you're doing in there, hurry up.
Now all she could do was maintain protective watch, ensuring no one interrupted whatever delicate magical intervention was occurring. The festival's final celebrations continued outside, providing useful cover for their absence, but dawn approached with concerning speed. Soon, questions would begin about the bride-to-be's whereabouts.
Whatever you're doing,
She whispered again, looking at their motionless forms.
do it faster.
Back in the Obsidian Realm, Cassius led Lyra to a specific location that appeared identical to the surrounding landscape, yet clearly held special significance to him. He knelt, gesturing for her to join him on the volcanic glass surface.
We need to perform a ritual, part spirit journey, part fire meditation.
He explained, his voice low and urgent as occasional crashes and roars from the ongoing battle punctuated his words.
It will transform our consciousness into forms that can traverse the boundary between this realm and the physical world.
Transform.
Lyra questioned, kneeling opposite him despite her confusion.
Spirit essence taking elemental form.
He clarified, already beginning to trace symbols in the air between them.
My duplicate can only distract the entity temporarily. This is our one opportunity to escape.
Across the obsidian plain, the battle intensified. The entity had abandoned any pretense of human resemblance, its form expanding into a towering inferno with a vaguely anthropomorphic shape. Cassius's spirit duplicate maintained its assault, landing blows that momentarily disrupted the creature's fiery cohesion before it reformed with increasingly enraged roars.
Focus on my voice.
Cassius instructed, his hands continuing their intricate movements.
This will combine spirit transition techniques with fire meditation patterns you already know. The synthesis creates a pathway neither discipline could achieve alone.
The concept immediately resonated with Lyra's understanding, a cross-elemental application that transcended traditional guild limitations. Exactly the sort of magical integration she had privately studied for years. Despite their dire circumstances, she couldn't help but appreciate the elegant symmetry of his approach.
Begin with the flame centering you practice in fire meditation.
He guided, his violet eyes holding hers with steady intensity.
But instead of containing the flame within your core, allow it to expand throughout your consciousness.
Lyra closed her eyes, finding the familiar mental pattern with practiced ease. The flame visualization formed immediately, her years of precise fire manipulation making this basic exercise second nature. As instructed, she allowed the imagined flame to expand beyond its usual boundaries, spreading throughout her awareness rather than remaining centered.
Good.
Cassius's voice reached her, somehow both physically audible and mentally present within her expanding consciousness.
Now imagine that flame taking shape, not a random pattern, but a specific form. The phoenix that represents your magical signature.
The suggestion aligned perfectly with her natural inclination. The phoenix motif she had incorporated into so many magical workings throughout her life. The avian symbol that had adorned her flame vestment just hours earlier in the physical world. The mental flame responded instantly, reorganizing into a recognizable shape with wings, head, and tail feathers all formed from controlled inner fire.
I'm doing the same with spirit essence.
Cassius explained, his voice taking on that slightly distant quality that indicated deep working.
Creating a form that represents my magical signature, the raven that bridges worlds between the living and dead.
Though her eyes remained closed, Lyra sensed the silver energy gathering around him, shaping itself into an avian form that complemented her fiery phoenix. Where her visualization burned with vibrant energy, his gathered with quiet intensity, different expressions of a similar purpose.
Now comes the difficult part.
He continued,
We need to harmonize these forms, creating resonance that can traverse dimensional boundaries, like what we established in the Ember Sanctuary, but more focused, more directed.
A tremendous crash from across the plains suggested the battle had reached new intensity. Lyra's concentration wavered momentarily as she sensed the entity's growing rage, its fiery assaults against Cassius's duplicate becoming increasingly desperate, as it perhaps recognized what they were attempting.
Focus.
Cassius urged, his voice drawing her attention back to their working.
Extend your phoenix consciousness toward mine. Not merging completely, but harmonizing, resonating at a compatible frequency.
The concept presented a genuine challenge, requiring her to maintain individual form, while simultaneously creating connection beyond ordinary boundaries. Similar to what she had achieved during their sanctuary working, but with the added complexity of a specific shape rather than a general energy pattern. Lyra directed her phoenix visualization toward Cassius's raven form, seeking points where their energies could connect without overwhelming either pattern. Where fire and spirit would traditionally oppose or cancel each other, she instead looked for complementary aspects. Warmth meeting perception, illumination joining insight, passion connecting with understanding.
Yes.
Cassius encouraged, clearly sensing her approach.
Finding harmony rather than dominance. Partnership, not subjugation.
The contrast with the entity's attempts to control and possess couldn't have been starker. Where it had sought to chain and claim her, Cassius offered connection that respected her separate identity, even while creating a shared pathway. The difference represented a fundamental choice between relationship models, one based on constraint, the other on consent. Their visualizations began resonating at a harmonious frequency, the phoenix and raven remaining distinct, yet somehow singing the same magical note in different octaves. Lyra felt the connection strengthening with each moment of maintained focus, creating something beyond either individual pattern alone. A sudden bellow of rage tore through the obsidian realm, the entity apparently recognizing their working's purpose.
No.
It roared, its voice carrying both fury and desperation.
She belongs to me.
Almost there.
Cassius said, maintaining focus despite the commotion.
The boundary between realms thins where our harmonized forms connect with it. Visualize your phoenix not merely as a mental construct, but as your actual consciousness, ready to fly through that thinning barrier.
Lyra deepened her identification with the fiery bird, no longer merely imagining its shape, but becoming it in essential ways, transferring her awareness into the visualization until the distinction between self and created form dissolved. The phoenix was no longer something she controlled, but something she was. A representation of her soul's true nature, given flight through magical working.
Now,
Cassius instructed, his voice taking on a strange, echoing quality as his own transformation neared completion.
open your eyes, but maintain the phoenix visualization. You'll see the pathway.
She opened her eyes to transformed perception. The obsidian landscape now overlaid with shimmering patterns invisible to normal sight. The wall that had previously trapped her now appeared translucent in specific places, the dimensional fabric thinning to near transparency where their resonant energies focused upon it. Beside her knelt Cassius, but not as she had seen him before. Silver light outlined his form, gradually resolving into an avian shape, a raven with eyes that retained human awareness. Its feathers formed from spirit essence rather than physical matter. Where transformation should have seemed alien or frightening, it instead felt natural, the inevitable expression of his true nature.
Follow me.
His voice reached her through their resonant connection rather than physical sound.
Trust what we've built between us.
He rose, not standing but taking flight, silver-feathered wings spreading as his consciousness fully assumed raven form. The transformed Cassius soared toward the thinning dimensional boundary, his passage leaving traces of spirit energy that further weakened the barrier between realms. Lyra felt her own transformation complete, physical awareness giving way to essential nature expressed through fiery avian form. She spread phoenix wings formed of controlled flame, their movement feeling both foreign and deeply familiar, as if she had always known how to fly but simply forgotten until this moment. With a powerful downstroke, her phoenix form launched skyward, following Cassius's silver raven toward the dimensional thinning. Behind them, the entity's enraged bellow reached new intensity as it apparently broke free from the duplicate's engagement.
No.
It howled, its fiery form surging across the obsidian plane with terrifying speed.
You cannot escape me.
The spirit duplicate, Cassius's silver copy, repositioned itself between their fleeing forms and the pursuing entity. Though clearly outmatched by the creature's raw power, it moved with strategic precision, creating obstacles and disruptions that slowed the entity's advance just enough to maintain critical distance. As Lyra and Cassius approached the thinning boundary, she finally understood what dimensional transition truly meant. Not physical movement, but a shift in consciousness itself, altering perception to recognize passage where a solid barrier had appeared to exist. The obsidian wall loomed before them, simultaneously an impenetrable obstacle and a permeable membrane depending on how one perceived its nature. Behind them, the entity closed distance with frightening rapidity, its fiery form expanding to fill the sky like an apocalyptic storm.
Return to me.
It commanded, its voice carrying compulsive force that pulled at Lyra's essence despite her transformation.
You are mine.
The duplicate made its final move as they reached the boundary, launching itself directly at the entity's core in a sacrificial assault that momentarily disrupted its pursuit. The distraction provided crucial seconds as Cassius's silver raven passed through the dimensional thinning, his energy signature creating a pathway that Lyra's phoenix form could follow.
Come.
His voice called through their connection.
Trust what we've created.
With a final surge of determination, Lyra directed her phoenix consciousness through the apparent barrier, focusing on their resonant connection rather than physical perception. For an eternal moment, resistance held, the dimensional boundary maintaining separation between realms. Then perception shifted, the barrier becoming a passage rather than an obstacle, accessible through properly attuned consciousness. As her phoenix form breached the boundary, she heard the entity's final howl of rage.
This isn't over.
Before dimensional transition enveloped her completely. For a timeless interval, nothing existed but the connection between her phoenix essence and Cassius's raven form, guiding each other through the void between realities toward a distant physical anchor. Meanwhile, the spirit duplicate landed a devastating blow to the entity's core, while it was distracted by their escape. The silver copy drove an ethereal blade directly into the fiery heart of the creature, causing its form to momentarily shatter into fragmented flames before beginning to reconstitute itself. The assault hadn't destroyed the entity, but had significantly disrupted its power, buying precious time for their souls to complete transition back to physical forms. In Lyra's tower chamber, Zara jumped back with a startled cry as both motionless bodies suddenly animated with dramatic gasps. Lyra sat upright with explosive motion, the light robe Zara had placed over her falling away to reveal her nude form. Her eyes flew open, pupils dilated as if adjusting to a radical change in perception, hands grasping at air as if to catch herself from falling despite being safely on the bed.
Lyra!
Zara exclaimed, rushing forward to embrace her friend without concern for her undressed state. Relief overwhelming propriety in that moment of reunion. But something was clearly wrong with Cassius. While Lyra had awakened with startling vitality, he remained partially slumped against the headboard, his complexion alarmingly pale. His violet eyes opened slowly, unfocused and disoriented, his breathing shallow and labored as if each intake required conscious effort. Lyra disentangled herself from Zara's embrace, her attention shifting immediately to Cassius's concerning state.
What happened?
She demanded, momentarily unconscious of her nudity as she moved toward him.
What's wrong with you?
Cassius summoned me here.
Zara explained quickly, grabbing a robe to drape around Lyra's shoulders.
He told me you were trapped inside the fire opal, and he was going in after you. I've been watching over both of you while whatever just happened was happening in there. He was desperate to save you, Lyra.
Cassius made a visible effort to focus, his usually sharp gaze clouded with exhaustion.
Had to leave. Part behind.
He managed, each word clearly costing significant energy.
Couldn't extract you without countermeasure.
What do you mean are part behind?
Lyra asked, her voice sharp with sudden understanding and growing alarm.
What did you do?
He smiled weakly, the expression holding no regret despite his obvious distress.
Spirit fragment.
He explained, his voice slightly stronger as he gathered himself.
Like Alek did, but willingly. My duplicate remains to fight.
You left part of your soul in the necklace.
Lyra's voice rose with equal parts incredulity and anger, emotion masking deeper concern. Words failed her momentarily before returning with force.
That's monumentally reckless. Do you have any idea what that could do to you? To your consciousness? To your magic?
Had no choice.
He replied simply.
Entity too powerful. Needed ongoing countermeasure.
Lyra's anger crumbled before his matter-of-fact acceptance of such extreme self-sacrifice. She had experienced the entity's terrible power firsthand, had felt its predatory intent focused upon her soul with horrifying intensity. That Cassius had willingly fragmented his own soul to create protection against such a threat, protection specifically for her, rendered her momentarily speechless.
How bad is it?
Zara asked, her practical nature focusing on immediate concerns.
Is this permanent damage?
Cassius's hand moved slowly to his robe pocket, extracting something that caught the early dawn light filtering through the tower windows. The moon opal, the spirit stone he had removed from the necklace the previous day, rested in his palm, its opalescent surface shifting between silver and pale blue as he extended it toward Lyra.
Take it.
He instructed, his voice slightly stronger.
It's keyed to both of us now.
Hesitantly, Lyra reached for the stone, her fingers brushing his as she accepted it. The moment she touched the moon opal, an immediate change became visible in Cassius's condition. Color returning to his pale features, his breathing deepening to normal rhythm, tension releasing from his posture as obvious discomfort diminished. Simultaneously, the stone warmed in Lyra's palm, establishing a connection that felt distinctly different from the necklace's invasive heat. Where the fire opals had imposed external will upon her, the moon opal offered respectful alignment, magical resonance without compulsion, a link without control.
That's better.
Cassius said, his voice nearly restored to normal, though exhaustion remained evident in his features. He straightened slightly, no longer needing support from the headboard.
The moon opal creates a sympathetic link between my primary consciousness and the fragment remaining in the necklace.
I don't understand.
Lyra said, still clutching the stone.
How does this help? What exactly did you leave behind?
A spirit duplicate, similar to what you saw fighting the entity.
He explained, each sentence coming more easily as the moon opal's connection strengthened.
Independent enough to maintain continuous resistance against the entity's influence, but linked to my main consciousness through the stone you're holding.
And the stone helps how exactly?
Zara asked, always focused on practical mechanics.
It channels spiritual energy to the fragment.
Cassius explained, addressing both women.
Without it, the portion of my consciousness left behind would eventually be overcome by the entity. It's too powerful to fight indefinitely without support.
His expression grew more serious.
Especially now that we know its true nature.
The Efreet.
Lyra said, the entity's partial revelations fitting into place.
Alek made some kind of bargain with a fire spirit.
Cassius nodded grimly.
One of the most dangerous kinds of spiritual contracts possible. Ifrits are ancient fire entities that exist beyond guild classification, neither fully elemental nor fully spiritual, but something that transcends both categories.
How bad is this?
Zara asked, looking between them.
Beyond the obvious problem of Lyra having a possessed necklace she can't remove.
Catastrophically bad.
Cassius admitted with scholarly precision despite the dire assessment.
Ifrit bargains always extract a terrible price. Alek sacrificed part of his soul to create the binding necklace, but that's merely the initial payment. When an Ifrit is involved, the final cost is invariably the bargainer's complete consumption.
You mean when Alek dies?
Lyra began, connecting the implications.
The Ifrit will claim his entire soul.
Cassius confirmed.
And potentially anyone bound to him through magical connection, like what the necklace is attempting to establish with you.
Silence fell across the tower room as this revelation settled upon them. The entity wasn't merely a magical construct or fragment of Alek's consciousness, but something far more ancient and dangerous. A being whose power transcended normal guild classifications, whose appetite extended beyond immediate control to eventual complete consumption.
So what do we do?
Zara finally asked, giving voice to the question foremost in all their minds.
The moon opal buys us time.
Cassius answered, his gaze meeting Lyra's directly.
My fragment will draw strength through it to maintain a stalemate with the entity. I don't expect it to win, and Ifrit's power is beyond any single mage's ability to overcome, but it should prevent further soul extraction attempts while we search for a more permanent solution.
You sacrificed a part of your soul for a temporary countermeasure?
Lyra asked, struggling to comprehend such an extreme action. His violet eyes held hers with unexpected gentleness despite their dire conversation.
A worthy exchange to prevent your complete consumption.
He said simply.
My fragment can resist indefinitely as long as you maintain connection with the moon opal.
Something in his straightforward acceptance of such personal cost affected Lyra deeply, stirring emotion beyond gratitude into territory she wasn't prepared to examine while still recovering from their ordeal. That he would fragment his very essence to protect her, accepting permanent division of his consciousness without hesitation or apparent regret, represented devotion beyond any she had previously encountered.
Don't look so worried,
He added, misinterpreting her stunned silence.
Spirit mages understand soul fragmentation differently than other guilds. We work with partial consciousness transitions regularly. It's uncomfortable, but not destructive to my primary essence.
This attempt at reassurance somehow made the situation more affecting rather than less. His concern for her peace of mind, despite his own significant sacrifice revealing priorities that placed her well-being above his own.
So we have temporary protection,
Zara summarized practically.
but the necklace remains. The entity still exists within it. And Alek expects some intimate time with you tonight, even if the actual wedding is still 6 months away. Have I missed anything?
Just the Ifrit's eventual claim on anyone magically bound to Alek when he dies.
Cassius added with scholarly precision that couldn't quite mask the gravity of this threat.
Which makes preventing the marriage more than a matter of personal preference. It's literally a question of soul preservation.
About that expected intimate encounter.
Lyra said, finally finding her voice again as she clutched the moon opal tightly.
I think it's time we stopped reacting to Alek's schemes and started implementing counterplans of our own.
Both Zara and Cassius looked at her with interest, recognizing the shift in her tone from defensive resistance to offensive strategy.
What did you have in mind?
Cassius asked, his obvious exhaustion giving way to professional focus.
Something that uses everything we've learned against him.
Lyra replied, determination hardening her voice as dawn light strengthened through tower windows.
Starting with making certain my father understands exactly what kind of fire spirit bargain his chosen son-in-law has made.
For the first time since the necklace had been placed around her throat, Lyra felt something beyond desperate resistance taking shape within her. A strategic offensive that would use her considerable analytical skills not merely to evade Alek's control, but to actively dismantle his carefully constructed plans. The moon opal warmed encouragingly in her palm as she outlined her thoughts, its gentle pulse so different from the necklace's invasive heat. The fire opals still encircled her throat, their enchantment temporarily held at bay by Cassius's extraordinary sacrifice, but no longer defining her experience or limiting her options. Dawn had fully broken over Pyreholm, ending the festival night and beginning a day that was supposed to lead to an intimate advancement of her relationship with Alek. Whatever came next would challenge everything she had previously accepted about her place in guild society, her family obligations, and her own capabilities when freed from artificial constraints. But she would face those challenges with unexpected allies. Zara's unwavering friendship, Cassius's sacrifice creating protection that respectful partnership had made possible. For the first time since childhood, Lyra felt not merely clever or capable, but actually powerful, not through dominance or control, but through connections freely chosen rather than forcibly imposed. The moon opal pulsed once more against her palm, resonating with this internal shift from reactive defense to proactive determination. Whatever Alek had planned for their sunset wedding, he would discover his bride-to-be had developed plans of her own. And unlike his schemes of domination and consumption, hers would be built on foundations of genuine strength that manipulation and control could never truly match.